Hey guys, my name is Kristina Parker. I'm the Communications Director for the Maine GOP, and today we are launching the first episode of our podcast, which is called SMAHT, because we're in Maine here, so it's a Maine GOP podcast, and I have Laura Whitcomb, and she is a lifetime member of Gun Owners of Maine, and she is the president of Gun Owners of Maine. And at the present, she is also the principal officer for the Keep Maine Safe Ballot Question Committee, which is obviously in regards to question 2 on the ballot this November. And she will correct me if I say that she is a firearms expert. However, I will go as far to say that she is an expert on red flag law as it pertains to Maine right now, and probably the most knowledgeable subject on it at the present time. She's also my mom. So we are going to talk about question 2 today and clear up some questions that people have. And to begin, I'm going to read the language, which is very deceptive and can lead people astray if they do not know background information, which is why we're chatting today. And the language is, do you want to allow courts to temporarily prohibit a person from having dangerous weapons if law enforcement, family, or household members show that the person poses a significant danger of causing physical injury to themselves or others? And that is what Mainers will see on the ballot when they go to vote this year. So first off, explain to me why this initiative is not just preventing gun violence in Maine, as that's what most proponents of this have been saying. Why is it not just preventing gun violence?
So you are correct. When the Maine Gun Safety Coalition gathers signatures to put the red flag law on the ballot, they use phrases such as, do you want to end gun violence in Maine? If you sign this petition, then you will be helping to pass a law that would have prevented the shooting in Lewiston. And both of those things are false and used to mislead people and play on their emotions in order to get what we now see as question 2 on the ballot. And so when people go in to vote, whether it's in-person absentee, which is open now, or on election day on Tuesday, November 4th, they need to really be informed about what that language actually means and plays out if enacted in the state of Maine, which is why we always tell people to know before you go, know before you vote, and that the answer for the safety of Maine, the safety of Maine's law enforcement officers, and as well as protecting our constitutional rights is to vote no on 2.
I personally would agree, and I myself, as an individual who votes in Maine, I always make sure I do a quick Google search before I head into the ballot box. And if people are looking for in-depth information, they can go to a very informative website that you guys have, which is keepmainesafe.com. Is that correct?
That's correct. We have all of the information. There's a few different subtitles that are on there, and one of them is called The Facts, and that delineates the top 6 reasons why this proposal, which some people call red flag laws, some people call it an extreme risk protection order, why it's a bad idea for Maine, why it's dangerous for Maine. It has links to the full proposal, which is 12 pages long, as well as links to different studies and statistics from across the nation from other states who have enacted red flag laws.
And that is a very helpful resource. I myself have referenced that quite a bit. And additionally, something the Maine GOP has been doing the last couple weeks is we've developed a myth versus fact list for people to reference in regards to question 2, but also question 1, which we will be talking about a couple weeks from now. And that is available on our website and on our Facebook page as well. And you've used the term red flag law, but another one that I have heard a lot, and many people have, is yellow flag law. And that especially was used a lot 2 years ago after the tragedy in Lewiston that you referenced. So let's talk about what is the difference between yellow flag law and this proposed red flag law.
So currently in the state of Maine, we have what a lot of people call yellow flag laws. In statute, it's also called an extreme risk protection order. And what that does is allows law enforcement, when somebody comes to them, whether it's a member of the community or a healthcare professional or a family member, comes to law enforcement and says that they have concerns that a person might be a danger to themselves or others, and almost always means that they have access to some sort of dangerous weapon, whether it's a firearm or something else. And so then what happens is the law enforcement officer will approach that individual and ensure that they have a mental health evaluation, and then the combination of the information that the law enforcement officer has plus the mental health evaluation will help them to determine whether or not they are indeed a danger to themselves or others. And so while not perfect, very few of our laws are perfect, but while not perfect, it's far and away better than what this proposal would do if passed in November in the form of question 2. So red flag laws, under the proposal, which you have to actually read the entire 12 pages to understand what's on there because the Secretary of State chose not to fully delineate what exactly this law would do in the way that she chose to word the ballot question. And so a member of your family or a former member of your family, which is important for people to know because your ex-spouse, your ex-partner, the mother or father of a child that you might have had with somebody 10, 20, 30 years ago are all people that are listed that can go and petition the court and then present evidence to determine whether or not you are a danger to yourselves or others, but you don't get to be present for that. You don't get a chance to defend yourself. And so there's no due process there because you are being accused of potentially being a harm to yourself or others, but you don't get to give your side of the story.
So guilty until proven innocent.
Exactly. And that's not an American value. That's not something that most people take lightly. And, you know, even if people don't necessarily get too worked up over the thought of having their firearms removed, a lot of people have an issue with law enforcement coming in and seizing your property before you've had any chance at all to give your side of the story.
I would have an issue with that with anything, let alone the firearm that I might own and possess that I use to protect myself and my family, but also to provide food for my family, which a lot of Mainers would say. I mean, we have a lot of hunters here. We have a lot of firearm owners in the state of Maine. So the police showing up and trying to take your property, regardless of what it is absurd. But is there any restrictions mentioned about when they could show up and any notice given to you? Could they just show up in the middle of the night?
They could, and in fact, part of the statute that's in those 12 pages is that every law enforcement agency across the state, whether it's the Maine State Police or your county sheriff's department or your local police department, has to actually craft a policy that would allow them to better surprise you at home. They actually are instructed in this proposal that they have to make a policy that would allow them to execute these orders without you knowing that they're coming. And so a common scenario that I give people is that if you live in the middle of Maine, as I do, and you don't really have any visitors unless they've been invited and you know that they're coming, that if your dog or something were to alert you to somebody in your yard, that you may very well answer the door armed. And then you set up a situation where you have law enforcement armed at your door, you meet them fully armed because you didn't know that they were coming and you don't know why that they're there. And that is why, as part of the Maine State Police's very lengthy testimony in opposition to this proposal, said that they would envision that they are going to need a lot more staffing because essentially they're going to have to put together SWAT teams to go into Mainers' homes to remove all of their firearms and hopefully lessen the altercation and the risks of that. But that is one of the other reasons why we are adamantly opposed to question 2 because of the risk both for Maine residents and law enforcement.
I am a little bit of a history nerd, which she would know because she's my mom, but I'm constantly talking about the Constitution and our rights as individuals and liberty. I'm talking about Alexander Hamilton. I talk about that stuff all the time, and I'm super nerdy about it. Most people probably are not. However, with this conversation that we're having about the police or quote unquote the government showing up and saying, I'm going to take your guns, or even I'm going to take your property, I'm thinking back to the conversation that I often have with individuals who either agree with me or don't agree with me about what the purpose of the Second Amendment is. And obviously, some beneficial bonuses, I guess, would be to provide food for your family and for self-defense in the case of, especially as a woman, a physical altercation with someone stronger or bigger than me. But the root of the Second Amendment is actually to prevent tyranny within America, where we have the right to freedom and liberty and to make decisions for ourselves about our lives. So I'm thinking, if the government hears word from somebody or the police officers that this person's dangerous and they need their firearms removed. So then they come to a home of this individual. If that individual has firearms, then they can protect themselves from what could be a malevolent pursuit of his property being taken. But if they did not have those firearms and the property being that was seeking to be taken was not firearms, it was something else, or they wanted to come into your home for some other reason and you don't have those firearms, the math is saying this is very dangerous to individuals who are trying to defend themselves, but also just to liberty as a principle and the way of life we have in the United States. So this law is threatening more than just people's gun rights, but also several other amendments in the Constitution, including, I believe, the 4th and the 5th address due process.
So, and seizure of property.
And seizure of property. So this is a huge deal. It's not just another gun control bill that they're trying to propose. I mean, this was addressed in the state legislature this last year and probably times before this. How did that go down, even in a legislature that is probably a little bit more leaning towards gun control because it has a Democrat majority? It didn't pass. Can you explain to me why that was and what people were saying about this when we were talking about it earlier this year?
So part of the citizens initiative process is that when you get signatures and collect signatures to put a citizens initiative on the ballot, then part of that process is that bill has to be heard in the legislature. And the legislature could have chosen to pass it as it was without any changes, and we would have foregone this entire process. However, they didn't want to have a hearing on it, probably because they didn't want the Maine State Police to get up and testify for 40 minutes about why they thought it was such a terrible idea, which that entire testimony is on gunownersofmaine.org if anybody wants to watch it, along with their 3 pages of written testimony that they submitted about all of the reasons why red flag laws are bad for Maine. But they didn't want to do that because they didn't want to have to vote it down. Because regardless of whether or not you're a Republican or a Democrat in the state of Maine, I think that the Democrats that are representing their districts in the legislature are at a different level of firearms ownership, of caring about people's firearms rights than your typical Democrat who's just living out their life, whether they're in CD1 or CD2. And so the Democrat representation in Augusta knows that their constituencies don't want red flag laws and they don't want to vote on it and have it on their record. And so while, a couple of things that you said, it is the biggest piece of gun control legislation the state of Maine has ever seen, but it also really speaks to what you touched on with regards to our constitutionally protected rights. So both nationally and in our state constitutions, we have chosen to codify the right to keep and bear arms. And it is to defend against a tyrannical government. And that's not necessarily something that's popular to say in the mainstream, but that's reality. Because we need to be able to control what goes on in our government, and the way that we do that is by firearms ownership. And so when you talk about those rights that we have chosen to codify in our Constitution, the bar should be very high to take those rights away. If you have freedom of speech, just as one example, and the right to keep and bear arms. So just with those 2 examples, you have to really go through a lot in order to not be able to say the things that you want in the public square. There are some things that we've decided as a society that you can't say.
Right. Well, you're free to say anything, but you're not necessarily
free from the consequence.
From the social consequences for saying something absurd. So
we've decided that you should be able to do that for the most part. And we've also decided that unless you have, for example, violent felonies, just as one example, that you should be able to keep and bear arms. And so that bar for removing that right should be very high. And under this proposal in question 2, the bar for removing those firearms from somebody is basically just somebody who may or may not have your best interests at heart, may or may not be acting nefariously towards you. There's a lot of room for abuse when it comes to this law and going into a judge and presenting evidence.
Well, other states have this law and they've experienced it being used malevolently.
Yes.
Whether that was through, I think I heard children will get asked at school about firearms in the home, and then the school will use that as information or almost as a weapon against those parents. And as you were speaking, I was thinking to the United Kingdom, where you brought up free speech, which is really important, and it's a huge part of this issue because not only is it attacking our Second Amendment rights, but also Fourth and Fifth due process, like you were mentioning, but also the First Amendment, because what we're seeing in the United Kingdom and over across the sea is that people are getting raided within their homes for things that they say on social media. And because of laws that were made several years ago, preventing most people from owning firearms, it is now possible for their government to come into their homes because they are defenseless. And that is something that we would like to avoid in America by not accepting this law and saying no to red flag and no on question 2. And this conversation is more than guns, and that's the point I really want to hammer in, because some people don't like talking about it and they don't want to own firearms. I have friends who say, I think you should be able to have one, but I don't want one. And what we are saying now is that this is about more than just guns. And I'm not telling you how to vote. I'm giving you information where I think most people are going to say, yeah, I probably should vote that way. And you mentioned the website, but if people are feeling stirred and they're upset about this law, where can we get information and resources to help inform other people, like bumper stickers, signs, pamphlets? The website's a great resource. What are ways to get more information about this question?
So as you mentioned, there's the Keep Maine Safe website, which is keepmainesafe.com, all spelled out, M-A-I-N-E, and also all over the state, from Kittery to Presque Isle and Caribou, from the north and south of it, east and west, from Rumford to Calais. There are businesses and firearms dealers that have signs and bumper stickers and information like palm cards and business cards that you can pass out to your friends and family about why this is a bad idea. And I think that that's really the grassroots of Maine here is what is going to be the tipping point when it comes to this particular question, because the grassroots of Maine is never going to raise as much money as the people who put this on the ballot. They're heavily funded by out-of-state money. Their pockets are essentially bottomless, and so it's going to be incumbent upon people who do know that question 2 is on the ballot and who do care about firearms rights and due process and the safety of law enforcement and helping their fellow Mainer, of which question 2 does absolutely nothing. It's incumbent upon them to ensure that the people that they work with, their family, their friends, also know that it's on the ballot, and to encourage them to vote, whether it's in-person early voting, which is occurring now, or on Election Day.
And this is an off year, which means we don't have any state representatives, senators, congressmen, governors, president. None of those individuals are on the ballot. We have some local races, school board, and referendums, but this is a year between question 1 and question 2 where people should make an effort to get out to the polls, even if it's not on Election Day. And something we were discussing off camera is I wanted to get the exact date where early in-person voting ends, and that would be October 30th.
Correct.
Which is a Thursday. It's just a couple days before in-person election voting on the 4th, but up until October 30th, you can go to wherever you normally vote, so City Hall, the Town Hall, Town Office, things like that. Vote early in person, and if you wanted to, you could take your ballot home. The appeal of going early is just to do it there and get it over with, so if something comes up on the 4th, you are still making sure you're doing your part to vote against tyranny and also for secure elections with question 1.
And specifically with our audience and with people who do hunt, the rifle season starts on November 3rd this year in the state of Maine. And so if you don't want to have to go and wait in line and take that time on that Tuesday after rifle season starts, then you could vote early and make sure that you know that you've done it, you've taken care of it, you can check that box, and then you don't have to worry about it once the big hunting season starts.
You could have a pretty great day on the 4th knowing that you voted to save your Second Amendment rights and then also go and potentially execute your Second Amendment rights by providing for your family. So I think we're going to wrap up. I appreciate you coming on Wicked SMAHT, the Maine GOP podcast, and thanks.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.